As the U.S. continues its withdrawal from Afghanistan, there is no pause in the violence. Late last night in the northeast part of the country, a deadly attack on workers clearing landmines. Masked gunmen shot people working with the Halo Trust, an international nonprofit. 10 employees are dead and 16 are wounded. Afghanistan's Interior Ministry is blaming the Taliban. The Taliban is denying any involvement. Our next guest knows the Halo Trust well. In fact, while working for the BBC in Afghanistan in 1991, the organization helped keep him alive. For you regular listeners, you'll recognize his voice, longtime former member of the World Staff, ChrisWoolf. What's your reaction to this news, Chris?
I was devastated, Mark. I was actually awake when I saw the news drop at about 2 a.m. Eastern Time, and it was like a bombshell. I can't believe it. The Halo Trust is an incredible organization. Since 1988, they've cleared hundreds of thousands of landmines and unexploded bombs and shells in Afghanistan, saving countless lives, and I count my own among them. And of course, it's dangerous work, and they've lost people along the way, but this is by far the worst loss they've ever suffered.
Chris, what is the story behind the Halo Trust, and what kind of work have they undertaken over the years in Afghanistan?
Well, HALO stands for Hazardous Areas Life Support Organisation. It was actually founded by a former British Army officer called Colin Mitchell. In 1988, he began a new life trying to help ordinary people affected by war. With his military background, he decided on demining and recruited a bunch of former officers from the British Armed Forces to go out and train and lead teams of deminers. HALO now has almost 9,000 employees around the world, and about 30% are in Afghanistan. 98% are locals, like all of the victims in last night's attack.
Why are landmines such a problem in this area of Afghanistan? Do you know when they were placed and by whom?
In a nutshell, it goes back to the Soviet occupation in the 1980s. Both sides laid mines everywhere. The rebel Mujahideen got some from Pakistan with CIA backing, but most of the mines by far were laid by the Soviets and their communist allies. They left millions of landmines in the ground. Now, some with batteries died, some with wooden casings rotted away, but most are activated mechanically by pressure. So in a dry climate like Afghanistan, they'll last for decades. Every year, 2,000 to 3,000 Afghans are killed or wounded by them.
How do you physically demine an area? What is that process like?
Easiest thing to do is blow it up, Marco, if you know where it is. The Soviets kept actually very good maps of their minefields, but unfortunately they were all lost during the Civil War years in the early 90s. I talked to an ex-HALO guy who'd seen them and handled them and praised their quality. Then there are mine detectors, which are basically metal detectors. But those won't work if the mines are made of plastic or wood. If you suspect those are present, then it's the old-fashioned man on his knees with a knife probing the ground to try and find them.
Chris, I said earlier the Halo Trust kept you alive when you were in Afghanistan for the BBC years ago. Explain your personal connection to the Halo Trust.
Well, it was my first day out of the capital, Kabul. My BBC colleague and I were travelling in an aid convoy with a couple of mine experts, and as soon as we hit the city limits, we came across an armoured personnel carrier that had just been hit by a huge anti-tank mine. The scene was awful enough, but then you get the realisation that the road you're on is mined. The mines are buried, sometimes like 5 together, very deep in the potholes. So the mine guys I was with had the experience, skill and confidence to somehow navigate us through that mined road. But more directly, an hour or two later, we made a pit stop in an open field, and I can still see it. I started walking toward a copse of trees to go relieve myself when one of the HALO guys physically grabs my arm and pulls me back and yells, "Where the hell do you think you're going?" And I quickly learned that you can never go off the pavement or tarmac road if you can at all avoid it. That's a privilege denied the farmers and their families who have no choice but to go out into the fields, and it's a tough life.
ChrisWoolf is a journalist and a writer, formerly with the BBC and The World. His book, Bumbling Through the Hindu Kush, a memoir of fear and kindness in Afghanistan, will be released in September. Chris, great to hear from you. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Marco.